Hello and welcome to today's yoga practice. I'm Brenton, for anyone who's new to me. And today we're going to be focusing on the actions of adducting and abducting the legs. So we're going to be paying particular attention to muscles that line the inside of the legs and muscles that line the outside of the hips for the actions that move the legs apart and bring them back towards the midline. So when you're ready, we'll get started at the top of the mat. I laid out 2 yoga blocks up here just in case I want them later. And if you might want them too for some lunging that we'll do, then place them up there so you don't have to disturb yourself. So let's go ahead and stand up at the top of the mat in neutral so that the outer hips flow down to the outer knees, to the outer feet. Just taking a couple of knee bends here, like a little bouncy ones, and seeing, do my knees track forward? Do my hips track straight back? For most of us, the knees will point over the second toes in a neutral position, but of course we're all different. So we just find what's neutral for us. I'm slowly gonna start taking the legs towards straight by kind of wagging out the knees back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, so that as they draw to a fully extended position, it's not because I sucked the patella back into the thigh bone. My thigh bone sits right on top of my shin bone, and the patella sits right in front of that. Taking the hands onto the waist, think about rotating the pelvis over the top of the thigh bone forward and underneath. Just a few times. Trying to use the legs evenly. And then coming back to center, fixing the pelvis at neutral. Can I breathe way down deep in the basin of the pelvis, in the lower abdominals first? Can I feel my rib cage as a circumference around my torso that is sort of evenly held together, evenly lifted on all sides? And then can I disturb none of this? Not my spine, not my ribs, not my pelvis. And on the next breath in, reach the arms wide and up. And on the exhale breath, wide and down. I'm really trying to hold the rest of the body still as we flow in and out of this movement. So I'm really trying not to borrow this movement from any other part of the body. Next time we come down, hands go to the waist. Soft bend into the knees here. I want to fix the relationship of my pelvis through the crown of my head. So the abdominals are going to have to turn on a little bit. So will the muscles in the legs to help support this next action. As I start to flex the hips and hinge the pelvis forward towards like a tabletop position. And with the 4 fingers wrapped around, we know that flexion, we want that nice deep crease in there. So we get that nice deep crease. We lengthen the ribs away from the pelvis. Take a nice breath in. And on the breath out, we decide how we want to forward fold here. Do we want to soften the knees and take our elbows down? Maybe even widen the feet. Something like that if that feels good. And of course, we can always waterfall and tumble the spine forward and have the hands reach toward the ground. And here we'll start playing with kind of the first little round of movement for the adductors. And so remember that the adductors, I think of like adding the legs back towards the body. So that's the hugging to the midline sensation. So to turn on those inner thigh muscles, I'm going to take the blocks down to the ground here. Bend the knees, keep the hips nice and flexed so the tailbone points to the back of the room. And I'm just going to try to stay nice and still through my right leg, through the torso. And see, can I pick the left foot up off the ground and lower it? Can I do the same thing for the right leg and lower it? Do that a few times, alternating the legs. And for no particular reason, we can just do the lunge, our first lunge on the left foot forward. So let's stretch our right leg to the back now. Walk the hands underneath the shoulders. We can take the back knee down to the mat, to some blankets, whatever feels good. The first thing I like to do in a low lunge is track myself forward and backward, because there I can kind of get sensitive of like, okay, how are the legs and pelvis set with each other? Because ideally I want my hip bones to be in line with the outer knee and the outer foot of each leg. And that's quite a lot to pay attention to when the legs are doing two different things, right? And so as I go forward and backward, I can kind of feel it out. And the idea is that like the pelvis shouldn't be doing too much swaying left to right. So now coming forward, the last time we did a low lunge was in our hip extension practice, where we were focusing on extending the back hip. So this week we won't focus so much on that. We'll focus more on squeezing and drawing the legs into the midline. And so let's see that here. Can we draw our legs into our pelvis actively, like we were trying to scoop our pelvis away from the mat a little bit? And I want to see, can I hold this contraction evenly through my front leg, through my back leg? And now I'm going to make the contraction work a little bit more as I start to lift the hands away from the floor block. And so work the contraction into the hips as you begin to pull more upright. Draw the legs into the pelvis. So this, even though one leg's in flexion, one's in extension, they're still working the adductor work to draw in, and that gives me this little boost up where I feel nice and light and lifted. And as you're ready, coming down, draw the back toes under, lift the knee. We'll take the back foot forward underneath the frame of the body and change our sides. And so again, a good portion of time here to rock back and forth, and that's why I particularly find blocks helpful, just to give me a little bit more space away from the ground. And as I do this, I'm trying to get really sensitive about how the legs are set. And if I can't feel it, I gotta move around a little bit. I gotta be open to the possibility that there are different ways of arranging myself. And then as I come forward, I should feel pretty evenly set between the pelvis. The pelvis between the armpits feels pretty evenly set. And then from here, pressing down and drawing the inner thighs into the pelvis as if I wanted to bolster it away from the ground. Now feeling that contraction turn on, not being freaked out by it. So be okay with the contraction. This is how our muscles adapt. Contract, 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 contract so much that the hands can lift away from the support. The front body can draw back over the leg for a lunge. There is a balance component here, so don't be freaked out. You can always, up level, down level, whatever makes sense to you. Good. As you're ready, come forward, tuck the back toes under, and from here, bring that back foot all the way forward underneath the frame of the body. Here's where I'm going to remove my blocks. Don't need those anymore. How do you feel? Let's go to the center of the mat with our toes facing the long edge. And I want to feel here my legs in neutral just for the purposes of this. Not that external rotation or internal rotation is bad, but just that I want to feel neutral because that's what I want to train as my baseline, so that variations away from that are really controlled and monitored. So if I take my feet now, just a little bit wider than the hips, again, neutral, which I can always test by bending the knees a little bit, feeling the bounce. That will also help me weight my pelvis evenly between the legs, which feels good. And then once I'm kind of confident that everything feels good, I always like to wag my knees. I don't know why, that's just like what I've been doing these days, because my knees are very sensitive and they're kind of prone to just being like, straighten your legs, and then I get sucked back. So I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. So I gotta find, the position where the knees are still usable. They're still usable at a drop of a hat, right? And now it's here that I want to press the feet down evenly. I'm gonna draw energy up into the pelvis evenly. I wanna make sure that my pelvis is set upright in my body so I can put my hands around my hips and feel my landmarks, my ASIS on the front, for example, the frontal hip bones. I can hold those. And now it's here, I wanna caution us. We're gonna see how much abduction our body will give us. But I just want us to know that when the pelvis folds forward anteriorly like this, that has more space in the capsule to move the legs apart. But this isn't true abduction, right? Because it's actually like spinal flexion back here, where the front of the pelvis is folding forward. So we want to keep everything at neutral, and we just want to train the leg's ability to move away with a neutral pelvis. And that's going to train totally different muscles. So now I want us to see like a little kind of like penguin or something. We're going to start to heel toe the feet as wide apart as they'll go comfortably, with the legs in neutral and the pelvis upright. Any borrowing that we have from the pelvis folding forward is again not what we're looking to train. And so maybe this is a little bit less range of motion than you might normally take. That's good. Where I feel this, just because of where I need to be developed more, is on the front of the hips. That is quite sensational. And then the buttocks area. So these are our abductors back here. These are the ones that help support the back of the pelvis as the legs move wide apart. And you can see that as they scrunch up and they get wider, they want to move the foot more up to the sky. So really be active with this contraction back here. And now I'm going to see, can I get a little bit more length for my adductors, the inner thigh group, and just kind of work off any limitation I might have there. So I'm going to slide down into one leg, and then I'm going to push up and slide down into the other. And now I'm going to cruise from one leg to the next using my hands for support. And I'm going to try to get my pelvis to track back, way back, so that the hips are in deep flexion, as much flexion as I can. And if during this time I want to come down to the floor, because that seems like an okay thing to do, then I can, but that's not necessary. So we're working control, and then we can come all the way back on up. And then what we'll do is we'll move out of that range. We'll come all the way together, kind of walking out a little bit here, and then we can set ourselves up for round two. So now that we've had a little bit of time under tension, how have our tissues adapted? When we repeat, do we have the same range of motion, or is it a little bit altered? Okay, so start again, just feet wider than the hips, where you can be certain that you're set up well. You're set up for success. And you know, it's always a guessing game at the end of the day. We can start taking the legs wider. Again, for this purpose, training the legs in neutral rotation with the knees forward. And I'm just gonna, at some point, you know, the adjustments are gonna be small, they're gonna be slower, but I'm gonna see, oh, there it is, hello. What's my abduction? And I need to also be sensitive, in seam of the leg, out seam of the leg. This is truly like the leg moving away from the midline. So the inner thigh has to move with it. And that's why we just tried to get a little bit more clearance, a little bit more slack in here, so that now we can take advantage of that and take the legs a little bit wider. I love abduction. It always feels so good. So when you're ready, be nice and come in with the legs together. Feel how that feels. And then as it feels okay, let's go ahead, come on down to the floor, and we'll do some side plank work on our forearms. So coming to a place where we're resting on the right hip, we're trying again to rest in a way where the pelvis is completely stacked. So left hip bone right on top of right hip bone. It's not falling behind in space. And we're actually going to keep our hand here so we can feel any potential variation or borrowing that might happen from this area. So what I want to do is I want to feel the pelvis, stacked as I mentioned, the torso feeling okay. The legs, I'm going to work them out at straight. And I'm working almost in like a V, almost like a V position here. So the legs, it's almost like I'm a little bit in flexion, a little bit in hip flexion. So this is just where I feel good. You'll play around, you'll see. So from here, I'm going to go into active abduction. This is my left leg lifting away from my right leg, but my pelvis is not changing. And so you can see this is not as much as I was able to get standing when I could fix my foot on the floor and I could use that as leverage to hold myself open. That's okay. We're going to take it down. We're going to go up and down. So now we're training our active range of motion, our control. Good job. Okay, the next time you come down, go ahead and step that foot forward. I'm going to come up here a little bit onto the hand because this is now a little bit an external rotation and that can feel good. So I'm going to let the leg kind of open out here. I'm going to press against it just to kind of get a little bit of heat rolling, a little different sensation going in this outer hip. And now I'm going to come down and now I got my opposite leg. So this is training into the midline. So it's not as dramatic, maybe it's just a few inches, but I'm going to keep my hand on my pelvis and I'm going to work those inner legs to pull the thigh bone away from the ground. Good job. Go ahead, come on up from here. We're going to come around to the other side. So we're just doing as many repetitions as feels okay. I would say minimum 10, and then we can always repeat these cycles. So you can take the, one set of reps and then rest and then do it again. For the purposes of keeping our lesson brief today, we won't do that together, but just so you know how you can add intensity into this, because our tissues need to adapt to more load. Okay, so trying to get myself set up for side 2, where I feel like my pelvis is nice and stacked. I can use my hand to assess. I'm going to abduct my top leg. I'm going to hold there. And I'm just going to try to get nice and calm and breathe. You can always drop out of this. We're just trying to be as controlled as we can for as long as we can. And take the leg down and up and down. And now at your own pace. And consider that we're trying for more control. So I'd rather more control than more reps. That's what feels better in my body. Like when I'm done practicing, just a couple of reps, but really nice precision and really nice control is going to make me feel way better than a lot of reps with sloppy control. As I feel ready, I'm going to draw that leg in. I'm going to stretch it down to the floor. I'm going to press up just because this is what feels good to me, just to take a breather, a little rest between sides. And then coming down, I'm going to keep that leg here. Oh, it feels good to hold it too. I'll do that. And here we go. I'm just trying to work the adductors. So I gotta feel my pelvis here because I don't feel this just yet. Good. And I always like to hold the first one just so I can make sure I have the right muscle group. and then work up and down. Good. As you feel ready, go ahead, push on up out of this. To work a little bit more, let's come down to our backs. Just a few isometric holds. That's when we're contracting a muscle, but that's staying still. It's not doing some type of movement. So we can do maybe our abductors first. That's the outer hips. So if I were to take my feet just a little bit wider than my hips and root the heels forward and try to get it like as if I were standing. Try to get it as if I were standing. And so all the same principles are in place in terms of like how my legs are being used, how my pelvis is being used, my ribs. And I actually have to put some tension in each part of my body to hold it and position it like this, because otherwise it would just be like a big floppy mess, right? So there is a little bit of tension just to hold this like this. And now in the isometric work, again, my legs are not moving, but imagine that the legs wanted to split even farther apart and maybe even like move towards a full splits, like the side version, and turn on all those muscles as if they were going to create that action, even though the legs are not going to move. Good, and relax and roll it out, shake it out. We'll do another set. So reset the legs outside the hips. Get your little bit of tension going on through the whole system so that the body is supported as if it were standing. And then again, as if the feet are pressing out and away from each other without actually moving. Hold. Good, relax, roll it out. Let's do our isometrics for our adductors. So draw the knees in one at a time. You'll know this as like a reclined crow pose or a happy baby pose. But this is like the knees go in towards the armpits here. We can even kind of pull them in with the arms so the tailbone rolls up off the ground, not a big deal. And now we'll just take the arms to the insides of the legs and we'll apply some pressure. So the arms go out and the knees go in. Arms out, knees in. And release. I don't know, something that feels good. And again. So arms on the inside of the legs, knees hug in towards the armpits, knees in, arms out. Good, and release. Roll out a little bit here. We'll actually end in a seated position today. So however you want to come up, if you want to roll over, hug behind your legs, softly roll up. And it's here that we can take a seated wide-legged forward bend. So seated abduction, you can either work with the legs bent like so, where you're pulling onto your forelegs to get yourself nice and lifted. So you can be really in your hip flexion rather than rolling out of hip flexion and being more in spinal flexion, right? So we get like that. Or if Dandasana is pretty okay for you, you can begin to take your legs out from the midline one at a time. We are not trying to externally rotate them. So we're trying to have our knees just face up towards the sky. So again, it's true abduction. And I want to feel that nothing is trying to like reach out more than its counterpart. So my inner and outer heel are reaching out together. My inner and outer ankle are reaching out together, my inner and outer knee, inner and outer thigh. I feel myself nice and grounded through the sitting bones. And even this right here, quite sensational. So you can choose to stay here. You can also opt to lean back a little bit if that feels better. And of course, we can always walk ourselves forward more towards the forward fold version. So just taking a couple of deep, several breaths, even if it feels maybe natural to close the eyes at this point, that might feel nice. So as far as stretching is concerned, we have a stretch tolerance that's really designated by our nervous system and the communication between the belly of the muscle and the brain. And so when we first go into a stretch, we start to feel that newest part, the part of the stretch that we've never felt before. The muscle and the brain talk to each other and they say, hold on, this is a new place for me, stop. And so that's where you get that feeling of tightness, that sensation of tightness. It makes you not want to go any further. And so the way to kind of evolve that, because that's a very kind of primal, like, oh no, we're in danger, but it's kind of sounding off the alarm without there being any real cause for it. So what happens is that the longer we hold a stretch, the more it gives those receptors time to calm down and to stop that communication with the brain, at which point the brain signals the muscle to relax more. So this is why we sometimes like to hold poses for, longer than a minute, because that's when that communication with the nervous system starts to change. And so I'll actually leave us here for today. If you want to take another couple of forward folds, that might be nice. Might be nice to also pair this with some of the other hip practices that we've done: internal, external rotation, flexion, extension. I'm really happy to have done this series with you. I learned a ton. I put everything together into resources that I've compiled from Instagram, YouTube, from basically all of the movement experts that are making a lot of sense to me right now. And this is from all fields. It's not just yoga. There's a lot of physical therapists. There's stuff from functional range conditioning, which is like this new thing I'm just finding out about. But basically all of the things in here that look similar to yoga, but not totally yoga, I'm pulling them from all of these really cool different places. So if you want in on my resources, I invite you to join us on Patreon. That's the best place to move closer to us and to get access to my resources for all these modules. So I have the link for that in the description, and you can become our patron for minimum $1 a month. And on the plus side, you are also supporting our ability to make these videos for you. So thank you guys so much for joining today. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much. Have a good one.